Hello there, and welcome to Midnight Geography. Tonight we'll drift into the ancient geography of Australia. This is a land where time moves differently, where the Earth's oldest exposed rocks rest beneath the youngest nation's footprint. Australia's geography is a paradox written in sandstone and salt, a continent that is both island and mainland, where deserts bloom after decades of patience and where the land remembers every age the Earth has known. If you enjoy these peaceful geographical explorations, consider liking and subscribing. It helps other curious minds find their way here too. But for now, let's begin. The Nullarbor Plain holds one of the world's most remarkable features of human engineering, married to ancient geology. Here, stretching across the bottom of Australia like a limestone blanket, the railway runs for 478 kilometers without a single curve. This is the longest straight stretch of railway track on Earth, crossing a landscape that hasn't seen surface water for millions of years. The name Nullarbor comes from the Latin for no trees, though this isn't entirely true. Scattered shrubs dot the limestone plateau like lonely sentinels. Beneath this vast flatness lies a hidden world of caves, some large enough to swallow entire buildings, carved by water that vanished eons ago. The limestone itself tells a story of when this was all seafloor, compressed shells and coral, creating a foundation so perfectly flat that train drivers can set their throttles and not touch them again for 6 hours. At night, with no hills to block the horizon, the stars seem to rest directly on the Earth's edge. Not far from the western edge of Australia, on Middle Island, there exists a lake that defies expectation. Lake Hillier maintains its bubblegum pink color throughout the year, a hue so vivid it seems almost artificial against the surrounding eucalyptus green and ocean blue. The color comes from Dunaliella salina algae and pink bacteria that thrive in the lake's hypersaline waters. Even when water is removed in a container, it remains pink, as if the lake has somehow convinced the water itself to hold on to this unlikely shade. From satellite images 600 kilometers above Earth, the lake appears like a pool of strawberry milk, separated from the Southern Ocean by only a narrow strip of sand and vegetation. Scientists have found the lake's salt concentration matches that of the Dead Sea, yet somehow life persists here in microscopic abundance, painting the water in a color that belongs more to dreams than to geography. Beneath the red earth of Queensland lies an aquifer so vast it defies comprehension. The Great Artesian Basin contains enough water to fill Sydney Harbour 130,000 times over, yet this water moves with geological patience. The water reaching the surface today through natural springs fell as rain over 2 million years ago, when the first humans were just beginning to walk upright in Africa. This ancient water has traveled through porous sandstone at speeds measured not in kilometers per hour, but in meters per century, filtered through rock layers that purify it to an almost pristine state. The basin underlies nearly a quarter of the Australian continent, its waters warmed by the Earth's internal heat to emerge at temperatures that can reach 100 degrees Celsius. In the desert towns that dot the basin's extent, these boreholes create artificial oases where tropical plants grow in the midst of the outback, sustained by water older than human memory. Fraser Island presents a geographical paradox that shouldn't exist. Here, stretching 122 kilometers along Queensland's coast, tall rainforests grow directly in sand dunes that tower over 200 meters high. This is the only place on Earth where such a phenomenon occurs, where massive satinae and kauri trees sink their roots into pure sand, finding nutrients in the thin layer of decomposing matter that has accumulated over thousands of years. The island itself is the world's largest sand island, yet it contains over 100 freshwater lakes. their waters so pure that Lake Mackenzie's pH level matches that of distilled water. These perched lakes sit above sea level, held in depressions by organic matter and sand that is bonded into an impermeable layer called coffee rock. The sand here tells stories of ancient times, with 72 different colored sands creating natural artworks in the cliff faces, each band representing a different era when iron oxide stained the grains in unique ways. In the heart of Australia, near Alice Springs, the McDonnell Ranges contain quartzite ridges of almost incomprehensible age. These rocks predate complex life on Earth by 300 million years, formed when the planet's atmosphere contained no oxygen and the only life was microscopic organisms in ancient seas. The quartzite here began as sand on prehistoric beaches, compressed and heated until it transformed into rock so hard it rings like a bell when struck. The ranges run east to west for 644 kilometers, creating a backbone through central Australia that Aboriginal peoples have navigated for 60,000 years. In certain gorges, the rock walls glow red at sunset, not from the dying light, but from the billions of iron particles oxidized within the stone itself. These mountains have watched continents collide and separate, have felt ice ages come and go, standing as witnesses to every chapter of Earth's long story. Beneath the opal fields of South Australia, the town of Coober Pedy has carved out an existence unlike anywhere else on Earth. Here, underground homes maintain a constant temperature of 23 degrees Celsius, while surface temperatures soar to 50 degrees in summer. Some residences extend 9 meters below ground, with families living in excavated sandstone chambers that never need heating or cooling. The town's name comes from Aboriginal words meaning white man in a hole, a fitting description for this underground community where churches, shops, and even hotels operate in the perpetual twilight of artificial caves. The rock here is soft enough to excavate with basic tools, yet stable enough to create rooms with 4-meter-high ceilings that have stood for decades without support beams. In this subterranean world, the concept of windows becomes obsolete, replaced by skylights that bring columns of desert sun into living rooms carved from stone. Along Victoria's coast, the 12 apostles demonstrate the ocean's patient sculpture work. These limestone stacks erode at 2 centimeters per year, a rate that seems glacial until you realize that only 8 remain standing since records began in the 1920s. The limestone here formed from countless marine creatures compressed on the seafloor 20 million years ago, now standing as monuments to time's passage. Each stack tells its own story of resistance and surrender, with waves carving caves that become arches, arches that become stacks, and stacks that eventually return to the sea as rubble. The Southern Ocean here is particularly violent, with waves that have traveled uninterrupted from Antarctica, bringing a force that can be heard kilometers inland on stormy nights. In the morning light, these remaining apostles cast long shadows on the water, temporary sundials marking hours on a geological clock. Rising from the Western Australian plain, Mount Augustus presents a monolith twice the size of its famous cousin Uluru. At 858 meters above the surrounding land, it is the world's largest monocline, a single rock that has been tilted and folded but never broken. The granite here is 1.65 billion years old, formed deep in the Earth's crust when the planet was still learning how to create continents. Unlike Uluru's smooth sides, Mount Augustus wears a thin vegetation coat, with white-barked river gums growing from cracks where water collects during rare rains. The rock changes color throughout the day, from gray in the morning to golden at noon to deep purple at dusk, as if the mountain is breathing in light and exhaling shadow. Aboriginal peoples know this place as Burringura, a sacred site where initiation ceremonies have been conducted for thousands of generations. In far north Queensland, the Daintree rainforest has maintained an unbroken existence for 135 million years. This makes it older than the Amazon by 80 million years, a living museum where plants still grow that existed when dinosaurs walked the earth. The forest contains primitive flowering plants that appear nowhere else on the planet, evolutionary experiments that began when all the world's continents were joined as Pangaea. Here, the cassowary, a flightless bird that looks more dinosaur than avian, disperses seeds for over 200 species of rainforest plants, some of which cannot germinate without passing through its digestive system. The canopy here is so dense that only 2% of sunlight reaches the forest floor, creating a perpetual twilight where fungi glow with bioluminescence and vines drop from heights of 40 meters seeking soil. Off the coast of Lord Howe Island, Ball's Pyramid erupts from the ocean like a stone dagger. This is the world's tallest volcanic stack, rising 562 meters from the waves with a base only 200 meters wide. The pyramid formed 7 million years ago, the last gasp of a volcanic hotspot that created Lord Howe Island itself. Its sides are so steep that clouds often form at its peak, while its base remains in sunshine, creating its own weather system in miniature. For decades, scientists believed the Lord Howe Island stick insect, extinct since 1920, was gone forever, until a tiny population was discovered living on a single shrub growing from a crack in Ball's Pyramid's sheer face, 100 meters above the crushing waves. These insects, as long as a human hand, had survived on this vertical world for 80 years, unknown to science. Lake Eyre sits in South Australia's heart like a vast, shallow bowl, 15 meters below sea level. This is Australia's largest lake when it fills, spreading across 9,500 square kilometers, but this happens only twice per century. Most years, it remains a glaring expanse of white salt, so flat that it has been used to set land speed records. When the rains come to Queensland and water begins its slow journey down the river systems, the transformation is profound. The lake fills with water that has traveled up to 1,000 kilometers, bringing life to one of the world's most inhospitable places. Pelicans arrive in their thousands, somehow knowing from distances of 2,000 kilometers that the lake has filled. Scientists still cannot explain how these birds detect this rare event, arriving to breed on islands that exist for perhaps a year before the lake evaporates again into salt and silence. Hidden in the Kimberley region, the Bungle Bungle Range presents a geological puzzle written in stone. These beehive domes in Pernalulu National Park display sandstone layers that alternate between permeable and impermeable rock every few centimeters, creating bands of orange and gray that have formed over 350 million years. The orange comes from iron oxide, the gray from cyanobacteria that still lives within the rock, one of the few places on Earth where you can touch living stone. These formations remained unknown to non-Aboriginal peoples until 1983, hidden in a wilderness so remote that they escaped aerial surveys for decades. The domes themselves are fragile giants. The sandstone is held together by a thin skin of iron oxide and bacteria that, once broken, causes rapid erosion. Walking among them feels like moving through a city built by nature, with narrow passages between domes, creating acoustic chambers where whispers can be heard 50 meters away. Tasmania's Tarkine Wilderness harbors the world's second-largest temperate rainforest, a green cathedral where time moves differently. Here, Huon pines grow that are over 3,000 years old, some beginning their lives when Troy was being besieged. These trees grow so slowly that their wood becomes increasingly dense with age, eventually becoming so heavy it won't float. The forest floor here, is a sponge of moss and fallen logs, some nurse logs supporting dozens of other plants in death as they did neighbors in life. The Tarkine contains more than forest. Wild rivers run through gorges of Precambrian rock, and buttongrass plains stretch between forest islands like golden seas. In the morning mist, the forest seems to breathe, moisture rising from the canopy in columns that disappear into low clouds. Across the Simpson Desert, parallel sand dunes run with military precision for up to 200 kilometers, all aligned perfectly north-south. These dunes, some reaching 40 meters in height, were shaped by winds that haven't changed direction in 40,000 years, making them some of the most stable desert features on Earth. Between the dunes lie clay pans that become ephemeral lakes after rare rains, supporting a brief explosion of life before returning to baked earth. The sand here is red from iron oxide coating each grain, a process that has taken millions of years to achieve this distinctive color. From the air, the dunes look like ocean waves frozen in time, their crests marking the prevailing wind direction with such accuracy that they can be used for navigation. At Shark Bay in Western Australia, stromatolites build their rocky kingdoms just as they have for 3.5 billion years. These are not mere rocks, but living structures, built grain by cyanobacteria that were among Earth's first life forms. These organisms created our planet's first oxygen, transforming the atmosphere from toxic to breathable over billions of years. The stromatolites here grow at just 0.3 millimeters per year, meaning a knee-high formation has been building for over 2,000 years. They exist here because the water is twice as salty as normal seawater, too saline for the snails and other creatures that would normally graze on them. Walking among them is like visiting Earth's nursery, where life first learned to harness sunlight and change the world. The Great Dividing Range creates Australia's eastern spine, running 3,500 kilometers from tropical Cape York to temperate Tasmania. This makes it the world's third longest mountain range, though much of it is so eroded that it appears more as rolling hills than dramatic peaks. The range creates a rain shadow that defines much of Australia's climate, catching moisture from the Pacific and leaving the interior dry. Some sections are so ancient that they predate the Atlantic Ocean, formed when Australia was still part of Gondwana. Despite its name, the range doesn't always divide. In places, rivers have carved gorges completely through it, creating passages that Aboriginal peoples used as trade routes for tens of thousands of years. In the Kimberley's remote coast, the horizontal falls create a phenomenon that reverses twice daily. Here, massive tides up to 10 meters high force water through narrow coastal gorges, creating waterfalls that flow horizontally. The water moves with such force that it creates a height difference of up to 4 meters between one side of the gorge and the other, producing rapids that would be grade 4 whitewater if they were in a river. When the tide turns, the falls reverse direction, creating the only waterfalls on Earth that flow both ways. The gorges themselves are ancient, carved through rock that shows the scars of multiple ice ages and sea level changes. Near the small town of Hayden, wave rock rises from the plain like a breaking ocean wave turned to stone. This granite formation stands 15 meters high and stretches 110 meters long, its distinctive shape created not by wind, but by underground water erosion millions of years ago when it was still buried. The weathering occurred along the bedrock, creating the wave shape before the surrounding soil eroded away to reveal this frozen tsunami. The rock face displays vertical stripes of color, reds, yellows, and grays, created by minerals carried by rainwater running down its face for thousands of years. Local Aboriginal peoples knew this place as Katar Keech, part of a dreaming trail that extends for hundreds of kilometers. In Victoria's Grampians, rock shelters contain one of the world's most extensive collections of Aboriginal rock art. These paintings layer over 22,000 years of human history, with some shelters containing over 4,000 individual artworks. The art here ranges from hand stencils made by blowing ochre over splayed fingers to complex drawings of extinct megafauna that haven't walked the earth for 40,000 years. The sandstone here is perfect for preservation, with natural overhangs protecting the art from rain, while the rock's chemistry helps fix the ochre pigments. In the soft light of dawn, these ancient galleries come alive, shadows moving across the painted walls as they have for hundreds of generations, each sunrise illuminating stories older than written history. The Murray River meanders through southeastern Australia like a serpent learning patience. Along its 2,508-kilometer journey, the river has created over 20,000 meander loops, making its actual length 2.5 times longer than if it flowed straight. These loops form and reform over centuries, the river constantly rewriting its own story across the floodplain. Some bends grow so pronounced they eventually break through, leaving billabongs, orphaned curves of water that remember the river's former path. The Murray moves with no urgency, dropping only 2 centimeters per kilometer over much of its length, slower than most streams. In the Barmah forest, the river becomes so confused it sometimes flows north instead of west, creating wetlands where river red gums grow with their bases permanently submerged. The indigenous peoples who lived along its banks for 40,000 years called it various names: Milawa, Tongala, Indi, each tribe knowing their own stretch intimately, understanding that this river was many rivers, each section with its own personality. In the Northern Territory's heart, Goss's Bluff crater holds the memory of cosmic violence. This impact structure spans 22 kilometers, created when a comet or asteroid struck Earth 142 million years ago with the force of thousands of nuclear weapons. The impact would have been visible from space for weeks, the plume of vaporized rock reaching the upper atmosphere. What remains today is actually the crater's central uplift. The original crater rim, 24 kilometers wide, has long since eroded away. The rocks here were lifted from 3 kilometers underground by the impact's rebound effect, bringing to the surface stones that would otherwise never see daylight. The Western Arrernte people call it Norala, believing it was formed when a group of celestial women danced across the Milky Way and accidentally knocked a baby's cradle to Earth. Standing within the crater feels like being held in a geological embrace, the ancient walls rising 200 meters in a near-perfect circle. The Pinnacles Desert near Cervantes presents one of Australia's most surreal landscapes. Over 4,000 limestone pillars rise from golden sand, some reaching 5 meters toward the sky like ancient standing stones. These formations began as seashells when this area was beneath the ocean 30,000 years ago. Rain leached calcium from the upper layers of sand, cementing the lower levels into limestone. When the climate dried and vegetation died, wind eroded the sand away, revealing these hidden pillars. Some stand alone like solitary sentinels, others cluster in groups as if frozen in conversation. The pillars cast sharp shadows that wheel around them as the day progresses, creating a constantly shifting pattern on the desert floor. At sunset, the limestone glows golden, and the shadows stretch impossibly long, transforming the landscape into something from another world. Early Dutch explorers thought they had discovered the ruins of an ancient city, unable to believe such regular formations could be natural. At Australia's northernmost point, Cape York Peninsula reaches toward Papua New Guinea like a finger almost touching. Only 150 kilometers of water separate the two land masses at the Torres Strait, and at the shallowest point, the water is just 14 meters deep. During ice ages, this was a broad plain where humans and animals walked freely between what are now two separate worlds. The seafloor here still holds the evidence. River channels carved when this was dry land, now submarine valleys where currents flow like ghostly memories of ancient streams. The tip of Cape York itself is a place of remarkable isolation, accessible only by rough tracks that become impassable during the wet season. Here, the continent simply ends, red cliffs dropping into turquoise waters where two oceans meet. Green sea turtles navigate these waters by magnetic memory, returning to the exact beaches where they were born decades earlier. Kings Canyon in Watarka National Park reads like a geological textbook written in stone. The canyon walls reveal 440 million years of Earth's history in clearly visible layers, each meter of height representing roughly 400,000 years of deposition. At the bottom lie the oldest rocks, Morini sandstone laid down when Australia was covered by shallow seas. Above this, the Carmichael sandstone tells of ancient rivers and deltas. The layers continue upward through time, each with its own color and texture, creating a striped pattern that changes hue with the moving sun. The canyon was carved by an ancient river that no longer exists, its waters long since diverted by geological upheaval. At the canyon's rim, the Garden of Eden, a permanent waterhole surrounded by rare palms, exists as a remnant of wetter times, the cycads here being identical to fossils found in the surrounding rocks. Walking the canyon rim at dawn, you can watch shadows retreat down the walls, unveiling the ages hour by hour. The Blue Mountains wear their azure haze like a veil. This optical phenomenon occurs because over 90 species of eucalyptus trees release oil droplets into the air, which scatter blue light waves. On hot days, the effect intensifies as more eucalyptus oil evaporates, creating a blue so dense it seems you could swim through it. The mountains themselves are actually an eroded plateau, carved by rivers into a labyrinth of valleys and gorges. The Three Sisters rock formation stands as the most famous landmark, but the true wonder lies in the endless eucalyptus forest stretching to every horizon. These trees have adapted to survive fires that would kill most plants, their lignotubers allowing them to regenerate from their roots after the flames pass. Some of the trees here are descendants of those that grew when dinosaurs walked the earth. Their leaves found fossilized in Antarctic rocks from when Australia was part of Gondwana. In the morning, when mist fills the valleys and only the ridges emerge above the clouds, the blue haze makes the mountains appear to float. Kangaroo Island separated from mainland Australia 10,000 years ago when the last ice age ended and seas rose 120 meters. This isolation created an evolutionary laboratory where species developed independently from their mainland cousins. The Kangaroo Island kangaroos are smaller and darker than mainland varieties, while the echidnas here are larger and hairier, adaptations to island life. The Ligurian bees brought from Italy in 1884 remain the only pure strain in the world, the island's isolation protecting them from diseases that have affected bees everywhere else. The island's southern coast faces the Southern Ocean with nothing but water until Antarctica, creating cliffs where waves have carved remarkable sculptures like remarkable rocks, granite boulders worn into impossible shapes by 500 million years of rain and sea spray. The isolation that created this unique ecology also preserved it. Species that went extinct on the mainland survive here, living museums of what Australia once was. The Pilbara region holds Earth's earliest signature, Here, in rocks 3.48 billion years old, lie fossilized stromatolites that represent the dawn of life itself. These structures, built by ancient cyanobacteria, are so well preserved that scientists can see the individual layers built up over millions of years, each band representing a community of organisms that lived and died before any complex life existed. The rocks here are older than the oxygen in our atmosphere, formed when Earth's skies were orange with methane and the oceans were green with dissolved iron. The preservation is so perfect that under microscopes, the cellular structures of these ancient organisms are still visible, frozen in stone older than the moon's largest craters. The landscape here seems appropriate for such ancient things, red rocks stretching endlessly under a fierce sun, as if the earth is showing its bare bones. Lake George near Canberra performs a vanishing act that has puzzled scientists for decades. This lake completely empties and refills on a roughly 7-year cycle, with no visible outlet to explain where the water goes. At its fullest, the lake covers 250 square kilometers. At its emptiest, it becomes productive farmland where crops grow in the lakebed. The mystery deepens because the lake's level doesn't correlate simply with rainfall. Sometimes it fills during droughts and empties during wet periods. One theory suggests a network of underground caves and channels beneath the lakebed, but no one has found them. Aboriginal stories tell of a giant water bird that drinks the lake dry when it visits. When full, the lake is rarely deeper than 5 meters, so shallow that wind can push all the water to one side, leaving the other shore temporarily dry. Captain Cook's expedition noted the lake in 1820, describing it as sometimes full, sometimes empty, with no accounting for either state. Tasmania's walls of Jerusalem create a natural fortress in the Central Highlands. These dolerite peaks form an almost perfect circle around an alpine valley, with only one narrow entrance known as Herod's Gate. The dolomite here formed from volcanic intrusions 165 million years ago, cooling slowly underground to create vertical columns that erosion has sculpted into towers and battlements. Inside this geological citadel, cushion plants grow that are thousands of years old, expanding outward at rates of less than a millimeter per year. The valley floor holds tarns, small mountain lakes, that reflect the surrounding peaks so perfectly that photographers struggle to tell which image is real and which is reflection. Snow can fall here any month of the year, and the weather can change from sunshine to blizzard in minutes. The acoustic properties of the circular walls create strange effects. Conversations can be heard clearly across the valley, but shouts from outside the walls are muffled to silence. Mitchell falls in the Kimberley Cascade over rock terraces that preserve the patterns of ancient seas. The bedrock here contains perfectly preserved ripple marks from waves that lapped these rocks 1.8 billion years ago when they were beach sand. The falls themselves are actually 4 separate tiers, each flowing into pools that Aboriginal people have used for thousands of years. The rocks around the pools are covered in Wandjina art, faces with large eyes and no mouths, representing the cloud and rain spirits. The water here maintains a constant temperature year-round, fed by springs that emerge from deep within the sandstone. During the wet season, the falls become a thundering wall of water, but in the dry, they separate into delicate ribbons that trace the ancient patterns in the rock. Flying foxes roost in the trees beside the falls in their thousands, their chattering creating a constant background symphony. The Coorong Lagoon stretches like a ribbon along South Australia's coast, 140 kilometers long, but averaging only 2 kilometers wide. This narrow body of water creates a unique gradient of salinity, from fresh water where the Murray River enters to water 5 times saltier than the ocean at its far end. Each section supports different ecosystems, freshwater fish at one end, specialized salt-loving organisms at the other. The lagoon is separated from the Southern Ocean by a peninsula of sand dunes that have been building for 6,000 years, growing higher with each storm. Pelicans breed here in colonies of thousands, their young learning to fish in waters that change from fresh to hypersaline within a single day's flight. The name Kurong comes from the Ngarrindjeri word kurank, meaning long neck, perfectly describing this slender stretch of water that seems to go on forever. Mount Kosciuszko, Australia's highest peak, has been on a slow journey across the globe. Since it was first surveyed in 1840, the summit has moved 150 meters horizontally due to continental drift, traveling northeast at about the rate fingernails grow. This movement is part of the Indo-Australian Plate's steady progression, carrying the entire continent toward Southeast Asia. The mountain itself is modest by world standards at 2,228 meters, worn down by millions of years of erosion. In winter, snow covers the summit, but the snow rarely lasts more than 4 months. Alpine flowers bloom here in summer that exist nowhere else on Earth, having evolved in isolation on this island of altitude. The Aboriginal name, Kunama Namadgi, speaks to its significance as a place where the spirits dwell. From the summit on clear days, you can see the curve of the earth, the horizon stretching away in an perfect arc. The Undara lava tubes create a hidden world beneath Queensland's savanna. These tubes extend for 160 kilometers underground, created by a single volcanic eruption 190,000 years ago that lasted 3 months. When the surface lava cooled and hardened while molten rock continued flowing beneath, it created these hollow arteries through the earth. Some tubes are large enough to hold a railway train, others narrow to crawl spaces. In places where the roof has collapsed, pockets of rainforest grow in the sunken gardens, isolated islands of green in the dry landscape above. Bats roost in the tubes in numbers reaching hundreds of thousands, their nightly emergence creating clouds visible from kilometers away. The temperature inside remains constant at 22 degrees Celsius year-round, creating refuges where prehistoric insects have survived unchanged since the tubes formed. Rottnest Island near Perth was once a hill on a coastal plain. Until 7,000 years ago, people walked from the mainland to what is now an island, hunting and gathering along the way. The evidence lies on the seafloor between Perth and Rottnest, Aboriginal artifacts, campsites, and tool-making sites now covered by 20 meters of ocean. The island's isolation created a haven for quokkas, small marsupials that exist nowhere else, their friendly nature earning them the title of world's happiest animal. The limestone here is made entirely of compressed seashells and coral, so pure that early settlers burned it for lime. Salt lakes in the island's interior turn pink in summer as algae bloom in the hypersaline water. The surrounding reefs contain some of the southernmost coral communities in the Indian Ocean, existing at the very edge of where tropical species can survive. Back in the McDonnell Ranges, permanent waterholes defy the desert's thirst. These pools have never dried in recorded history, fed by springs from aquifers 600 meters below the surface. Ellery Creek Big Hole, Ormiston Gorge, and Glen Helen Gorge contain water so permanent that fish species have evolved here that exist nowhere else, trapped in these oases for thousands of years. The water emerges at a constant temperature, creating microclimates where ferns and palms grow in the middle of the red center. Some pools are so deep, their bottoms have never been reached. Local Aboriginal traditions, speaking of them as bottomless, connecting to underground seas. The rocks around these waterholes are polished smooth by countless generations of animals coming to drink, their paths worn into the stone like signatures of survival. Wilpena Pound in the Flinders Ranges creates a natural amphitheater of stone 17 kilometers long. This geological formation is actually a synform, a downward fold in the Earth's crust that erosion has inverted, leaving the harder rocks standing as walls while softer rocks wore away. Inside this natural fortress, sounds behave strangely. A shout can echo for up to 7 seconds, bouncing between the ancient walls. The pound, an Old English word for enclosure, contains its own watershed, with creeks that flow toward the center before escaping through Wilpena Gap. From the air, it resembles a giant's handprint pressed into the earth. The rocks here span 800 million years of history, from before complex life existed to well after the first animals appeared. Aboriginal peoples used this natural sanctuary for ceremonies, the acoustics allowing speakers to be heard clearly by hundreds of people without raising their voices. The Coral Sea stretches northeast from Australia's coast, containing the world's largest marine park at nearly 1 million square kilometers, 3 times the size of Germany. This vast expanse of water holds reef systems that dwarf even the Great Barrier Reef in isolation and pristine condition. Osprey Reef rises from depths of 2,000 meters to break the surface in a perfect circle 25 kilometers across. The water here is so clear that visibility can exceed 60 meters, allowing sunlight to penetrate deep enough to support coral growth at depths usually too dark for photosynthesis. Ocean currents here create upwellings that bring nutrients from the deep, supporting food chains that attract sharks, whales, and seabirds from across the Pacific. Some reefs in the Coral Sea have never been visited by humans, remaining as they have been for thousands of years. Lake Mungo's dried lakebed preserves moments from 40,000 years ago in stunning detail. Here, archaeologists have found human footprints preserved in mud that hardened to stone, including the tracks of children running at speeds that can be calculated from their stride length, about 20 kilometers per hour. One set of prints shows a one-legged man moving at considerable speed, possibly hopping, his single footprint deep and clear. The lake dried up 18,000 years ago, but its sediments hold the story of climate change over 100,000 years. The walls of China, sand dunes on the lake's eastern shore, contain layers like pages in a book, each representing different climatic periods. In certain lights, the exposed sediments glow with colors from cream through orange to deep red, the iron content painting the landscape in shades of ancient time. The Atherton tablelands tell a story of violence written in water. Here, 12 volcanic crater lakes formed within minutes of each other 10,000 years ago, during a single eruptive phase that changed the landscape in an afternoon. Each lake is nearly perfectly circular, surrounded by rainforest that grows to the water's edge. Lake Ecom and Lake Barine are so pure that they contain some of the clearest water in the world, with visibility to 20 meters depth. These lakes have no surface streams flowing in or out. They're filled entirely by rain and groundwater, creating closed ecosystems where evolution has taken unique paths. Fish that somehow reached these isolated waters have developed into distinct species in just 10,000 years. The lakes maintain different temperatures at various depths that don't mix, creating distinct layers where different organisms live, like apartment buildings in the water column. Heard Island emerges from the Southern Ocean like a forgotten world, 4,000 kilometers southwest of Perth. Here, Big Ben volcano has been erupting continuously since 2012, though few have witnessed it. This is Australia's only active volcano on Australian territory, its summit hidden beneath glacial ice that turns to steam where lava meets frozen water. The island exists in perpetual storm, with hurricane-force winds recorded on more than 300 days each year. The volcano rises 2,045 meters from the ocean, its slopes covered in glaciers that flow directly into the sea, creating a landscape that seems more Antarctic than Australian. Elephant seals breed on the black volcanic beaches in their thousands, indifferent to the rumbling mountain above them. The lava here is building the island larger with each eruption, adding new land to Australia's territory, grain by grain, though the violent southern ocean erodes it nearly as fast. Scientists who visit must time their arrivals between storms, sometimes waiting weeks for a window of merely difficult weather rather than impossible conditions. The Tanami Desert receives the same annual rainfall as London, about 600 millimeters, yet remains one of Australia's most arid regions. The difference lies in what happens moments after the rain falls. The evaporation rate here is so intense that 99% of moisture returns to the atmosphere within hours, the ground becoming powder dry while puddles still reflect the sky. The rain often evaporates before reaching the ground, creating virga, ghostly curtains of precipitation that hang from clouds but never kiss the earth. When rain does fall properly, perhaps once every few years, the transformation is instantaneous. Seeds that have waited decades germinate within hours, and the red sand disappears beneath a carpet of white, yellow, and purple flowers that live their entire life cycle in weeks. The desert knows how to wait and how to seize its moment. Aboriginal peoples crossing the Tanami navigated by knowledge passed down through generations, understanding where rock pools might hold water for a few precious days after rain. In Tasmania's Southwest National Park, some trees have discovered immortality through cloning. The Huon pines here don't just grow from seeds, they clone themselves, sending up new trunks from ancient root systems. Some of these groves are genetically identical organisms that have been alive for 10,500 years, making them among the oldest living things on Earth. Each trunk might live for only 2,000 years, but the organism itself continues, spreading slowly across the forest floor at rates barely measurable in a human lifetime. The wood of these ancient trees is so saturated with oils that it won't rot, and logs that fell centuries ago remain perfectly preserved in the tea-colored rivers. The pines grow less than a millimeter in diameter each year, creating growth rings so fine that a magnifying glass is needed to count them. Walking among these trees is walking among individuals that were already ancient when the pyramids were built. Montgomery Reef in the Kimberley performs a daily magic trick that seems to defy physics. As the tide drops, the reef appears to rise from the ocean, water cascading off its surface in countless waterfalls. Within 3 hours, 400 square kilometers of coral reef emerges from the sea, creating a temporary landscape that exists for just a few hours before the tide returns. The reef doesn't actually rise. The extreme tides here, reaching 12 meters, drop so dramatically that the reef is exposed. Green sea turtles, dugongs, and manta rays find themselves in increasingly shallow pools, creating feeding opportunities for seabirds that arrive in their thousands. The reef's surface is riddled with channels and pools that never fully drain, creating a labyrinth of marine life stranded between tides. From the air during this transformation, the reef looks like a vast creature surfacing, water streaming from its back in silver ribbons. Cradle Mountain's dolerite columns stand as monuments to patience. These hexagonal pillars formed when magma cooled at exactly 1 degree per 1,000 years. a rate so precise that deviation of even half a degree would have created irregular shapes instead of these perfect geometric forms. The columns stand like organ pipes, some reaching 30 meters in height, their surfaces worn smooth by ice ages that have come and gone. The precision of their formation speaks to a time when the Earth had time to be meticulous, when geological processes unfolded without hurry. The Aboriginal name for the mountain, Riawana, refers to the striped pattern these columns create on the mountain's face. In winter, ice forms between the columns, expanding and contracting with temperature changes, slowly prying them apart in a process that will eventually topple these stone sentinels, though not for thousands of years yet. The Great Western Tiers create Tasmania's most dramatic geological statement, a single escarpment dropping 600 meters that runs uninterrupted for 100 kilometers. This wall of dolerite rock was formed by the same volcanic processes that created Cradle Mountain, but here the result is a continuous cliff face that divides Tasmania's central plateau from the northern plains. Waterfalls plunge over the edge in dozens of places, some falling free for over 100 meters before hitting rock. The escarpment creates its own weather, forcing moist air from the north to rise and cool, producing rain that feeds the forests clinging to its face. From below, the tiers appear as an insurmountable wall, but hidden gullies provide passages to the plateau above, routes that thylacines once used and that wallabies still follow. In certain lights, the cliff face appears to glow, the dolerite reflecting sunset colors that transform the gray rock into bands of gold and crimson. Lake Amadeus holds 600 million tons of salt in a crust 5 meters thick, a deposit that reforms completely every time the lake floods. This flooding happens perhaps once a decade, when exceptional rains in central Australia send water flowing into this vast basin. When water arrives, the salt crust dissolves from below, creating a saturated brine that can't hold any more salt in solution. As the water evaporates over following months, the salt precipitates out in perfect cubic crystals, rebuilding the crust layer by layer. The process creates patterns visible from space, polygons of salt divided by narrow channels where the crust cracks and heals. Walking on this salt sounds like walking on snow, each footstep creating a distinctive crunch. The salt here is so pure it needs no refinement, formed and reformed through countless cycles of flooding and evaporation over millions of years. Beneath Perth, the Gnangara Mound Aquifer performs a delicate balancing act. Here, 20 cubic kilometers of fresh water float on ancient seawater 300 meters below ground, the two kept separate by density differences like oil on water. The freshwater lens, recharged by rain falling on the sandy soils above, has sustained Perth for over a century. But this is a precarious arrangement. Pump too much fresh water, and the salt water below rises to contaminate the supply. The aquifer exists in sand laid down over millions of years, each grain rounded smooth by ancient rivers. The water moves through this sand at about 10 meters per year, filtered so thoroughly that it emerges cleaner than most surface water. Trees above send roots down 30 meters to tap this water, creating a connection between the underground reservoir and the sky above. Ningaloo Reef breaks all the rules about where coral reefs should grow. Stretching 260 kilometers along Western Australia's coast, it grows just 200 meters from shore in some places, close enough to swim to from the beach. This proximity exists because of an unusual combination of currents and geology. The continental shelf here is extremely narrow, allowing deep, nutrient-rich water to well up close to shore. The reef supports over 500 species of fish and 250 species of coral, creating diversity usually found only in remote oceanic reefs. Whale sharks, the world's largest fish, arrive each year with clockwork precision, somehow knowing when coral spawning will provide the feast they've traveled thousands of kilometers to find. The reef exists at the meeting point of tropical and temperate waters, allowing species from both zones to coexist in ways found nowhere else. The Gawler Ranges hold volcanic formations that seem architecturally impossible. Here, lava cooled into organ pipe structures 90 meters tall, but only 1 meter wide, standing like massive stone reeds. These formations occurred when volcanic ash and pumice welded together while still hot, then cooled in vertical columns. The cooling was so uniform that the columns are nearly identical in width along their entire height. Between these stone pipes, erosion has carved narrow slots where a person can touch both walls simultaneously. The acoustic properties of these formations are remarkable. A whisper at one end of a column can be heard clearly at the other, 90 meters away. The rocks here are rhyolite, containing tiny crystals of quartz that sparkle in sunlight, giving the organ pipes the appearance of being dusted with diamonds. Christmas Island's annual red crab migration creates one of nature's most synchronized movements. Each year, 43 million crabs begin their journey from the forest to the ocean, timing their migration with the first rains of the wet season and the lunar cycle. The crabs travel 5 kilometers over several days, moving mostly at night to avoid dehydration. Roads become rivers of red as the crabs cross in such numbers that the sound of their movement can be heard hundreds of meters away. The entire island ecosystem depends on this migration. The crabs' burrowing aerates the soil, their droppings fertilize the forest, and their larvae feed countless marine species. The timing must be perfect. Females release their eggs into the ocean at high tide during the last quarter of the moon, when tidal currents will carry the larvae out to sea rather than wash them onto rocks. The Yu-Yangs rise from Victoria's volcanic plains like islands of ancient granite. These outcrops formed 365 million years ago, crystallizing 10 kilometers underground from molten magma. It took 100 million years for erosion to remove the overlying rock and expose these granite tores. The granite here contains large pink feldspar crystals that formed slowly as the magma cooled, creating a rock that sparkles in sunlight. The Yu-Yangs create their own microclimate, forcing air to rise and cool, producing more rainfall than the surrounding plains. Aboriginal peoples use the rocky outcrops for ceremonies and navigation, with grinding grooves worn into the granite over thousands of years of use still visible. The granite weathers in distinctive patterns, creating balanced rocks and hollow caves called tuffoni, where salt crystallization has eaten into the stone grain by grain. Bathurst Island's tidal movements create temporary rivers in the ocean. Twice daily, 55 billion liters of water surge through channels only 80 meters wide, moving at speeds that would challenge Olympic swimmers. These tidal races create standing waves, whirlpools, and rapids in the open ocean, phenomena usually associated with rivers. The force is so great that it reverses the flow of freshwater streams on the island, pushing saltwater kilometers inland. Fish have adapted to these extreme conditions, timing their movements to ride the tides like aquatic highways. During spring tides, the water level can change by 8 meters in 6 hours, exposing vast mudflats that gleam like mirrors before the returning tide covers them in minutes. The sound of these tidal movements can be heard kilometers away, a constant reminder of the ocean's relentless rhythm. The Glasshouse Mountains puncture Queensland's coastal plain like monuments to volcanic violence. These 13 peaks are volcanic plugs, the solidified magma that once fed volcanoes 26 million years ago. The surrounding volcanic cones, made of softer ash and lava, eroded away over millions of years, leaving only these resistant cores. Each mountain has a distinct shape. Mount Cunoran stands like a finger pointing skyward. Mount Tibrogargan resembles a gorilla hunching over the plain. The rocks here cooled at different rates, creating varied textures from fine-grained basalt to coarse-grained gabbro. Captain Cook named them the glass houses in 1770, thinking they resembled the glass furnaces of Yorkshire. For the Gubby Gubby people, these peaks are family members turned to stone, each with its own story and relationship to the others, their positions marking seasonal changes and navigation routes. Lake Tyrrell transforms into Australia's mirror after rain. This shallow salt lake in Victoria becomes a perfect reflective surface, so flawless that indigenous astronomers used it for 40,000 years to study the stars. The lake bed is incredibly flat, varying by only centimeters across its 200 square kilometer expanse. When covered by a thin layer of water over its salt crust, it creates reflections clearer than glass. The salt here forms in hexagonal plates that interlock like a natural tiled floor. On still nights, standing on the lake's surface means standing among the stars, with constellations both above and below, creating a disorienting sense of floating in space. The lake's name comes from the Aboriginal word Tiril, meaning sky, perfectly capturing this place where earth and heaven meet. The Larapinta Trail in the McDonnell Ranges offers a walk through time itself. The trail follows a geological timeline where each kilometer represents roughly 2 million years of Earth's history. Starting with the youngest rocks and walking toward the oldest, hikers literally travel backward through time. The rocks change color and texture with age, red sandstones giving way to white quartzite, then to dark metamorphic rocks that predate complex life. Fossils appear and disappear in the rock layers, stromatolites in the oldest sections, primitive shells in younger rocks, then nothing in rocks that formed before life began. The trail crosses the same geological features multiple times as ancient folds in the Earth's crust repeat the sequence, like pages in a book that's been crumpled and smoothed. Winjana Gorge presents walls built entirely from death. These limestone cliffs are compressed ancient reef made from countless coral, shells, and marine organisms that lived 375 million years ago when this was a tropical sea. The fossils are so well preserved that individual species can be identified, including nautiloids with shells up to 30 centimeters across and stromatoporoids that built reef structures identical to modern corals despite being completely unrelated. The gorge was carved by the Leonard River, which exposed these ancient reefs layer by layer. In the dry season, the river reduces to a series of pools where freshwater crocodiles float motionless for hours. The limestone here is so pure that it rings when struck, and Aboriginal peoples discovered that certain sections produce different tones, using the gorge walls as a lithophone, a stone xylophone. Mount Gambier's Blue Lake undergoes a mysterious transformation each November. For 5 months, the lake maintains a brilliant cobalt blue color, then fades to steel gray for the remainder of the year. The color change happens over just a few days, as if someone had added dye to the water. Scientists believe the change relates to the warming of surface waters causing calcium carbonate to precipitate, scattering blue light, but the exact mechanism remains debated. The lake fills a volcanic crater 75 meters deep, fed by underground springs that maintain a constant inflow. The water is so pure, it's used as the city's drinking supply without treatment. Local Aboriginal stories tell of a giant who created the lake by digging for water with his bare hands, the blue color being the reflection of his sorrow at leaving his homeland. The Franklin River performs a vanishing act worthy of magic. For 4 kilometers, the river runs underground through limestone caves, entering as a rushing torrent and emerging as a gentle flow 6 degrees colder. The temperature drop occurs because the water travels through caves that maintain a constant cool temperature year-round, insulated by hundreds of meters of rock. Inside these caves, the river has carved cathedral-sized chambers where the sound of water creates echoes that last for 10 seconds. The river's disappearance and reappearance has created unique ecosystems at both ends. The entrance caves harbor species that need twilight conditions, while the exit pools support fish that require the cooler, more oxygenated water. During floods, the caves cannot contain the river's volume, and water erupts from usually dry openings in the hillside like temporary springs. Kata Juta spreads across the desert like a gathering of sleeping giants. These 36 domes cover 21 square kilometers, with the tallest, Mount Olga, reaching 200 meters higher than nearby Uluru. Unlike Uluru's single mass, Kata Juta is a conglomerate, a natural concrete of pebbles and boulders cemented together by sand and mud. Some of the boulders within the formation are themselves older than Uluru, having been eroded from mountains that no longer exist. The valleys between the domes create wind tunnels where temperatures can be 10 degrees cooler than the surrounding desert. These valleys support rare plants that exist nowhere else in the central desert, sustained by water that collects in the narrow gorges. The Aboriginal name, Kata Juta, means many heads, and from certain angles, the domes do resemble a gathering of heads bowed in conversation, their shadows creating expressions that change throughout the day. The Indian Ocean Drive reveals Earth's autobiography written in stone. Along this 60-kilometer stretch of Western Australia's coast, 250 million years of geological history lie exposed in the cliff faces, each layer marking an epoch when the world was unrecognizable from today. The oldest rocks at the base formed when all Earth's continents were joined as Pangaea, progressing upward through layers that record the birth of the Indian Ocean, the age of dinosaurs, and the arrival of mammals. The limestone layers contain fossils that change dramatically with height, trilobites giving way to ammonites, then to modern shells. Some layers are blood red from iron deposited when Australia was a desert, others white from when it was seafloor. Driving this road at sunset, the cliffs glow different colors as the light catches each geological age differently, as if time itself was illuminated. The road curves with the ancient coastlines preserved in the rock, following beaches that existed millions of years apart, now stacked atop each other like memories. Lawn Hill Gorge maintains an eternal spring. Here in Queensland's northwest, springs from an aquifer 120 meters below keep the water at exactly 24 degrees Celsius year-round, regardless of air temperatures that can swing from near freezing to over 40 degrees. This constant temperature has created a refuge where tropical fish species survive hundreds of kilometers from their nearest relatives. The springs emerge through limestone that filters the water to crystal clarity, creating pools so clear that depth becomes difficult to judge. What appears to be a meter deep might be 4. The gorge walls are decorated with tufa formations, limestone deposits from the spring water that build elaborate terraces and curtains. Aboriginal paintings on the gorge walls depict rainbow serpents, the mythological beings associated with permanent water sources. In the pools, archerfish shoot jets of water to knock insects from overhanging branches. their aim perfected in the still water that never varies. The Abrolhos Islands exist where they shouldn't. These islands, 60 kilometers off Western Australia's coast, host coral reefs at 29 degrees south latitude, the southernmost coral reefs in the Indian Ocean. They exist here only because the warm Leeuwin current flows south from tropical waters, creating a ribbon of warmth in otherwise temperate seas. The islands sit where tropical and temperate waters meet and mix, supporting an impossible combination of species: tropical corals growing next to kelp forests, tropical fish swimming with temperate species. The reefs here grow faster than those at the Great Barrier Reef, despite being 1,000 kilometers farther from the equator. During winter, humpback whales pass through waters where tropical fish feed above coral gardens that shouldn't exist. The islands themselves are made of coral debris and bird guano compacted over thousands of years, constantly being built higher by nesting seabirds while waves try to wash them away. Lake Clifton harbors living rocks that grow with geological patience. The thrombolites here, structures built by microorganisms, grow at just 1 millimeter per year, meaning a knee-high formation has been building for 2,000 years. These are among the few places on Earth where these living rocks still form, descendants of the organisms that dominated Earth's seas billions of years ago. Unlike their ancient ancestors, these thrombolites must compete with modern life, surviving in this lake only because the water is too salty for most organisms that would graze on them. Each thrombolite is unique, shaped by the specific community of microorganisms building it, creating underwater sculptures that look like miniature mountains. At sunset, when light angles through the water, the thrombolites cast shadows that make the lake bottom look like an alien landscape, which in a sense it is, a window into Earth's ancient past. The Dampier Archipelago scatters 42 islands across 45 kilometers of ocean, each island a different chapter in volcanic history. The islands formed from different volcanic episodes over millions of years, creating an archipelago where each island has unique geological composition. Some are granite, others basalt, still others made of metamorphic rocks twisted by heat and pressure. This geological diversity has created ecological diversity, with different soils supporting different plant communities, which in turn support different animals. Some islands are home to rock wallabies found nowhere else, evolved in isolation over thousands of years. The waters between the islands hide the largest collection of Aboriginal rock art in the world, over 1 million petroglyphs carved into the rocks, some dating back 40,000 years. The tides here are extreme, exposing vast areas of reef and rock at low tide, creating temporary land bridges between islands that appear for just hours before the ocean reclaims them. Carnarvon Gorge preserves a pocket of moisture in the Queensland desert through botanical ingenuity. The moss garden here maintains 65% humidity, despite being in a region that receives only 600 millimeters of rain annually. This miracle occurs because the narrow gorge traps moisture, while overhanging rocks protect mosses and ferns from direct sunlight. The sandstone walls weep constantly with slow seepage from the water table, creating perpetual dampness that supports plants that belong in rainforests, not semi-arid regions. Some of the tree ferns here are descendants of those that grew when dinosaurs walked the earth, surviving ice ages and climate changes in this sheltered refuge. The moss grows so thick on some walls that it muffles sound, creating areas of profound silence broken only by the occasional drop of water. King ferns spread fronds 3 meters long in the perpetual twilight, while elkhorns and staghorns grow to enormous sizes on the gorge walls. Beneath the Southern Ocean, the Murray Canyons create an underwater Grand Canyon invisible from the surface. This submarine canyon system plunges 4,500 meters below sea level, deeper than the actual Grand Canyon, carved by ancient rivers when sea levels were lower. The canyon heads begin just 50 meters underwater, then plunge into darkness where sperm whales hunt giant squid in the abyss. Currents flowing through these canyons create upwellings that bring nutrients from the deep ocean to the surface, supporting one of the most productive fishing regions in Australian waters. The canyon walls preserve layers of sediment that record climate changes over millions of years, including evidence of when the Murray River was a much mightier stream, carving these gorges when they were above sea level. Research submarines exploring these canyons have discovered deep-sea coral gardens and species new to science, living in perpetual darkness kilometers below, where sunlight penetrates. Magnetic Island generates its own weather through the peculiar property of granite. The island's granite mass heats differently than the surrounding water, warming faster during the day and cooling slower at night. This temperature differential creates convection currents that generate afternoon thunderstorms even when the mainland just 8 kilometers away remains dry. The granite here contains enough magnetite to affect compass readings, giving the island its name when Captain Cook's compass behaved strangely while sailing past. The island's isolation has preserved populations of koalas free from the diseases affecting mainland populations, creating an ark for the species. The granite boulders scattered across the island balance in impossible positions, worn smooth by millions of years of weather into shapes that seem sculpted rather than eroded. Some of these balanced rocks can be rocked by hand, despite weighing several tons, pivoting on contact points no larger than a fist. The Hamersley Range wears bands of iron that record Earth's greatest chemical revolution. These banded iron formations were laid down 2.5 billion years ago when the planet's atmosphere first gained oxygen. Before this time, iron dissolved in the oceans like salt. When the first photosynthetic organisms began producing oxygen, it reacted with this dissolved iron, causing it to precipitate and settle to the seafloor in layers. These layers, now exposed in the Hamersley Range, alternate between iron-rich red bands and iron-poor gray bands, possibly recording seasonal or other cyclic changes in oxygen production. The iron here is so pure that some sections are 68% iron by weight, among the richest iron deposits on Earth. The ranges glow deep red at sunset, the iron oxide in the rocks seeming to remember and reflect the ancient chemical reaction that created them billions of years ago. Tunnel Creek flows through darkness for 750 meters, creating a river cave where fresh and salt water meet. During the wet season, fresh water flows through the tunnel, but in the dry season, tidal influence pushes salt water deep into the cave, creating distinct layers where waters of different densities refuse to mix. Divers can see these thermoclines as shimmering boundaries in the water, like underwater mirages. The tunnel formed when an ancient reef was uplifted, and the creek found a weakness in the limestone, slowly dissolving a passage that has grown larger with each flood. Colonies of bats roost in the cave's highest chambers, their guano feeding unique cave-adapted insects that never see daylight. Aboriginal leader Jandamara used this cave as a hideout in the 1890s, knowing passages that allowed him to move through the range unseen. Light enters the cave through collapsed sections of roof, creating chambers where shafts of sunlight illuminate underground pools like spotlights on a darkened stage. Lake Disappointment sprawls across Western Australia's interior, a salt lake that rarely justifies its size. Covering 1,200 square kilometers when full, it seldom exceeds 50 centimeters in depth, even during exceptional floods. The explorer who named it in 1897 was searching for a freshwater lake marked on incomplete maps, finding instead this vast salt pan. The lake's flatness is extraordinary, laser measurements show elevation variations of less than 10 centimeters across its entire expanse. After rain, this minimal depth creates the illusion of walking on water, with the salt crust just beneath the surface supporting weight while water covers it. The salt here forms in polygonal patterns that from the air look like a giant's tilework, each polygon several meters across, divided by narrow channels where the crust is cracked and healed repeatedly. When dry, the salt crystals catch sunlight in billions of tiny mirrors, creating a glare so intense it can be seen from space. The Wolf Creek crater preserves a moment of cosmic impact with remarkable precision. Iron meteorite fragments embedded in the crater walls are magnetically oriented to Earth's magnetic field as it was 300,000 years ago, providing scientists with a snapshot of the planet's magnetic history. The crater, nearly a kilometer across and 60 meters deep, was formed by a meteorite weighing about 50,000 tons, hitting at 15 kilometers per second. The impact energy was equivalent to multiple nuclear weapons, vaporizing the meteorite and sending shocked quartz, rock altered by incredible pressure, flying for kilometers. Aboriginal stories describe a rainbow serpent emerging from the ground here, possibly cultural memory of the impact or its discovery. The crater's rim is raised 25 meters above the surrounding plain, created by rock ejected from the impact and folded back on itself. In the crater's center, trees grow larger than anywhere else in the region, fed by water that collects in the depression. The Research archipelago contains 105 islands scattered like stepping stones off Western Australia's southern coast. Each island has become an evolutionary laboratory, with isolation creating unique species on islands just kilometers apart. Quokkas on one island differ subtly from those on another, having evolved separately for thousands of years, despite the tiny distances involved. The islands are granite outcrops, the peaks of hills that became islands when sea levels rose 7,000 years ago. Some are home to species that went extinct on the mainland. The Research archipelago rock wallaby survives here after disappearing everywhere else. The waters between the islands are so clear that the seafloor is visible at 30 meters depth, revealing underwater forests of kelp that sway in currents like terrestrial trees in wind. During winter storms, waves crash over islands 20 meters high, depositing salt that has created unique plant communities adapted to extreme salinity. The Sydney Basin tells the story of ancient swamps that became a city's foundation. The coal seams here formed 250 million years ago, when this region was covered by vast swamps that extended for 36,000 square kilometers. These weren't ordinary swamps, but forests of giant tree ferns and primitive conifers, growing in conditions unlike anything on Earth today. Layer after layer of vegetation accumulated, compressed first into peat, then into coal, as the weight of overlying sediments increased. Some coal seams are 10 meters thick, representing millions of years of plant growth compressed into a space you could walk across in seconds. Between the coal layers, sandstone preserves impressions of leaves so detailed that the veins are visible, and fossilized tree trunks stand upright where they grew, now turned to stone. The basin has shaped Sydney's development. Valleys where ancient rivers cut through the sandstone became transport corridors, while the resistant sandstone cap created the flat areas where suburbs spread. Mount Tempest on Moreton Island stands as testament to the power of wind and time. This is the world's highest coastal sand dune at 285 meters, growing approximately 1 meter every 500 years as wind carries sand grain by grain from the beach below. The dune is not merely a pile of sand, but a complex system with different aged sands creating distinct layers. The oldest sands at the base have been there for over 700,000 years, compressed and partially cemented, while fresh sand arrives daily at the summit. The view from the top encompasses the Pacific Ocean, Moreton Bay, and the Glass House Mountains, a panorama that changes as the dune slowly grows higher. Despite being made entirely of sand, the dune supports vegetation, with hardy plants stabilizing sections and creating microhabitats. Sandboarding down its slopes follows paths that indigenous peoples used for ceremonies, the sand holding footprints for just moments before wind erases them. The Bellarine Peninsula rotates like the hour hand of a geological clock, turning clockwise 0.5 degrees every million years. This slow rotation gradually changes the shape of Port Phillip Bay, with computer models showing it will eventually close the bay's entrance if the movement continues. The rotation is caused by complex tectonic forces as the Australian plate grinds against the Pacific plate far to the east. Evidence for this movement comes from magnetic minerals and volcanic rocks that point to where north was when they cooled, showing progressive rotation through time. The peninsula's beaches migrate slowly around its perimeter, yesterday's north-facing beach becoming tomorrow's northeast-facing shore. This movement is too slow for humans to perceive, but over geological time it reshapes coastlines and redirects rivers. The indigenous peoples of the area have stories of the bay forming, possibly cultural memories, from when sea levels were lower and the bay was a river valley. Devil's marbles balance impossibly in the Northern Territory desert. These granite boulders, some weighing 6,000 tons, rest on points of contact smaller than dinner plates. The formation began 1.6 billion years ago, when magma cooled underground, contracting and cracking into rectangular blocks. Erosion exposed these blocks, and weather rounded them into spheres, a process called spheroidal weathering. The marbles appear to defy physics, but their balance points have been tested by millions of years of weathering and remain stable. During the day, the granite expands in the heat, and at night it contracts in the cold, creating sounds like muffled gunshots as the rock cracks. Some marbles are split perfectly in half, as if cut by a giant's blade, the result of water freezing in cracks and expanding. Aboriginal tradition holds these are the eggs of the rainbow serpent, and camping among them at night, when they creak and groan with temperature changes, makes this mythology feel prescient. The Catherine Gorge system reveals itself as 13 separate gorges that only connect during the wet season floods. When waters rise 20 meters above dry season levels, what appears as distinct canyons becomes a single navigable waterway. Each gorge has its own character, some narrow with walls that nearly touch overhead, others wide with sandy beaches. The walls display 1.8 billion years of geological history, with rocks at the base older than complex life on Earth. During the dry season, each gorge contains isolated pools where different fish populations have developed slight variations, evolution in progress. Flying foxes roost in the thousands on the gorge walls, their chattering echoing between the cliffs at dawn and dusk. The traditional owners, the Jawoyn people, know 13 different names for the gorge system, one for each section, understanding that this is not one place but many, connected by water's memory. Lake Ballard stretches across Western Australia, covering 2,000 square kilometers, yet holds water only once per decade for approximately 3 weeks. When it fills, the transformation is absolute. Within days, brine shrimp hatch from eggs that have waited in the salt for years, and thousands of birds arrive from across the continent. The lake bed is so flat and white, it has been used for land speed record attempts, its salt crust creating a surface harder than many roads. Scattered across the lake bed are 51 sculptures by Anthony Gormley, human figures cast from local residents, standing sentinel on the salt. These sculptures were positioned using GPS to create specific relationships with each other and the horizon, turning the entire lake into an art gallery 10 kilometers across. At night, with no light pollution for hundreds of kilometers, the stars reflect in any residual moisture on the salt, creating the illusion that the figures stand among the cosmos. The Warrumbungle Mountains stand as monuments to erosion's patient sculpture work. These extinct volcanoes in New South Wales have had 1,000 meters of rock carved away over millions of years, exposing the solidified magma chambers that once fed volcanic eruptions. What remains are the volcanic plugs and dikes, the hardest rock that formed in the volcano's throat, now standing as spires and domes above the surrounding plain. The Bread Knife, a dike just 4 meters wide but 100 meters high and nearly 600 meters long, rises like a wall built by giants. This blade of rock formed when magma squeezed through a crack and cooled, and everything around it has since worn away. The rock here cooled at different rates, creating variations in crystal size that give each formation its own texture and color. At night, these stone sentinels stand against the stars, their silhouettes unchanged since humans first walked this land. The name Warrumbungle comes from the Gamilaroi language, meaning crooked mountains, perfectly describing these twisted remnants of Earth's violent past. Montague Island emerges from the ocean just 9 kilometers from New South Wales coast, rising from waters 90 meters deep like a mountain whose peak barely breaks the surface. This sudden rise from the seafloor creates powerful upwellings, bringing nutrients from the deep that support over 10,000 seabirds. The island exists at the intersection of 2 ocean currents, creating a mixing zone where warm and cold waters meet, supporting an unusual mixture of tropical and temperate species. Fur seals breed here in the hundreds, choosing the same rocky platforms their ancestors have used for thousands of years. The granite that forms the island is 380 million years old, part of the same batholith that created much of the Australian east coast. Little penguins nest in the island's caves and crevices, their calls echoing through the night like a chorus from another world. The lighthouse keeper's quarters, abandoned for decades, slowly surrender to the weather and the birds, becoming part of the island's natural architecture. The Canning Stock Route stretches 1,850 kilometers across Western Australia's deserts, a line of 51 wells each spaced exactly 1 day's cattle drive apart. This spacing wasn't arbitrary. It represents the maximum distance cattle could travel between water in the desert heat. Each well was hand-dug through rock and sand, some reaching depths of 30 meters to find water. Many wells tap into underground streams that flow through gravel beds deep beneath the desert surface, water that might have fallen as rain hundreds of kilometers away. The route crosses 5 deserts and passes between sand dunes that tower 40 meters high. Along its length are the remains of attempts to make the desert profitable, abandoned camps, broken windmills, graves marked only by stones. The track itself is often invisible, erased by wind and sand, requiring navigation by compass bearing between wells. Some wells still function after a century, their water as vital to desert travelers today as when they were first dug. Cape Leeuwin stands at Australia's southwest corner, where 2 great oceans converge. Here, the Indian Ocean meets the Southern Ocean in a visible line of turbulent water where different temperatures, salinities, and currents collide. From space, satellites can detect this oceanic boundary as a color change, the warmer Indian Ocean appearing lighter blue than the cold, dark Southern Ocean. The Cape experiences some of the strongest winds on Earth, with waves that have traveled unimpeded from Antarctica, crashing against cliffs that rise 56 meters above the sea. The lighthouse here, Australia's tallest, has watched over this meeting of waters since 1896. On calm days, the ocean boundary moves north and south with the tides, like a living thing breathing. Ships rounding the Cape report compass variations as they cross between oceanic domains, and the water temperature can change by several degrees within a few meters. This is where the Leeuwin Current begins its journey north, carrying tropical warmth along Australia's western edge. The Jenolan Caves demonstrate nature's chemistry laboratory at work. Within just 200 meters, formations grow at dramatically different rates due to subtle variations in water acidity. In the Temple of Baal, stalactites grow 3 millimeters per century, while in the nearby River Cave, identical formations grow 10 times faster. This variation comes from different water paths through the limestone. Some water picks up more carbon dioxide from soil, making it more acidic and able to dissolve and deposit limestone faster. The caves contain formations found nowhere else, cave pearls formed by water dripping onto grains of sand, slowly coating them in limestone until they become perfect spheres. Some chambers contain flowstone so pure it's translucent, allowing light to pass through rock. The caves breathe with barometric pressure, air flowing in and out through passages too small for humans to enter. Aboriginal peoples knew these caves for thousands of years before European discovery, calling them Binumia, dark places. Port Campbell's limestone cliffs retreat from the ocean in a slow surrender that has lasted millennia. These cliffs move inland at 2 meters per year, carved by waves that never rest. Since Aboriginal peoples first arrived, the coastline has retreated 20 kilometers, meaning their ancient campsites now lie somewhere beneath the waves. The limestone here is soft, made from compressed sea creatures that lived 20 million years ago, and it dissolves readily in the slightly acidic seawater. The retreat isn't uniform. Harder layers resist longer, creating the arches, stacks, and caves that make this coast famous. Each winter storm claims more rock, sometimes dramatically, when entire sections collapse without warning. The sound of erosion is constant here, the hiss of spray dissolving limestone grain by grain, the crack of rocks splitting, the thunder of collapse. Maps of this coastline become obsolete within decades, today's peninsula becoming tomorrow's island, then eventually disappearing altogether. The Great Sandy Desert holds a secret network of ancient waterways. Chains of salt lakes align perfectly north-south for 850 kilometers, marking the courses of rivers that flowed millions of years ago. These rivers carved valleys that wind and rain have since filled with sand, but their paths remain visible from space as lines of white salt lakes. During rare floods, water follows these ancient channels again, flowing between lakes as if the rivers remember their old courses. The lakes themselves are time capsules, their salt layers recording climate changes over millions of years. White layers from dry periods, darker bands from wetter times when algae bloomed. Some lakes are so salty that salt crystals grow like flowers on any object left in the water. Between the lakes, the desert sand holds seeds that wait decades for the right conditions, then carpet the ancient river valleys with flowers that last just weeks before returning to patient sleep. Mount Buffalo rises from Victoria's highlands like a granite fortress collecting snow 500 kilometers north of Tasmania. This plateau catches 2 meters of snow annually, despite being at the same latitude as Morocco's Atlantic coast. The mountain creates its own weather, forcing moist air to rise and cool, wringing out precipitation that would otherwise continue inland. The granite here split into massive blocks as it cooled, creating chasms like the cathedral. where walls of rock rise 30 meters on either side of passages barely wide enough to walk through. In winter, waterfalls freeze into ice curtains that climbers scale with axes and crampons. The plateau top is a landscape from another world, bare granite dotted with snow gums, twisted into bonsai shapes by wind and ice. Horn Valley contains plants that survived the ice ages here, isolated populations that exist nowhere else. When clouds sit below the plateau, you stand in sunshine above a sea of white, peaks of other mountains emerging like islands. The Diamantina River defies the usual rules of water flow. During major floods, when Lake Eyre begins to fill, this river reverses direction for up to 300 kilometers, flowing backward as water from other rivers raises the lake level faster than the Diamantina can drain. This reversal creates ecological chaos and opportunity. Fish that normally never meet suddenly share waters, and nutrients flow in unexpected directions. The river spreads across floodplains 60 kilometers wide, becoming less a river than a slowly moving inland sea. When the flow reverses, confused pelicans follow the water upstream, ending up hundreds of kilometers from where they started. The reversal can last weeks, with the river unable to decide which way to flow, creating slack water where sediments settle in layers that record these hydraulic arguments. Local station owners have learned to read the river's moods, knowing that a reversal means Lake Eyre is filling and the desert is about to bloom. Phillip Island's seal rocks tell a story of rapid geological change. These rocky platforms only emerged from the ocean 6,000 years ago when sea levels dropped slightly, yet they now host 20,000 Australian fur seals. The rocks themselves are basalt from ancient volcanic flows, worn smooth by waves, but still showing the columnar jointing that formed as lava cooled. The seals have worn grooves in the rock from countless generations, hauling out at the same spots, their bodies polishing the stone to a dark sheen. During breeding season, the rocks disappear beneath bodies, the air filled with barks and calls that can be heard 2 kilometers inland. The rocks are gradually being worn away by both waves and seals, losing centimeters each decade. Between the rocks, channels funnel waves into blowholes that spray water 10 meters high, creating rainbows in the mist that seals swim through seemingly for joy. The Ord River carries an entire landscape to the sea, piece by piece. Moving 30 million tons of sediment annually, the river extends its delta by 2 meters into the Timor Sea each year, slowly claiming the ocean. During the wet season, the river runs red with eroded soil from the Kimberley, so thick with sediment that you cannot see your hand beneath the surface. This sediment creates new land where mangroves immediately colonize, their roots trapping more sediment, accelerating the land-building process. Satellite images show the delta growing like a living thing, new channels appearing with each flood. The sediment plume extends 50 kilometers into the ocean, visible from space as a red stain spreading into blue water. Crocodiles patrol these muddy waters, using the poor visibility to ambush prey. The river has moved so much landscape that the Lake Argyle Dam, built in 1971, has already lost significant capacity to sediment, the lake slowly filling with the Kimberley's displaced earth. Mount Isa sits above an ore body that tells a story of impossible geology. The ore extends 1,900 meters underground, following a fold that twisted 180 degrees during formation, turning rock layers completely upside down. This means miners working at depth are actually mining rock older than that at the surface, the usual rules of geology inverted. The ore formed 1.6 billion years ago in an ancient sea, where metal-rich fluids from deep in the earth met oxygen-rich seawater, precipitating minerals in concentrations rarely seen. The fold that twisted these deposits was caused by continental collision, forces so immense they turned solid rock into something that behaved like putty. Following the ore requires mining in spirals, tracking the twisted layers through 3 dimensions. The heat increases with depth, reaching temperatures where rock begins to flow rather than break. Water at the deepest levels is fossil water, trapped when these rocks were at the surface over 1 billion years ago. The Eyre Peninsula paints itself in pink. Here, salt lakes display color bands that shift from white through pink to deep magenta, depending on salt concentration and algae growth. Lake McDonnell stretches for 40 kilometers, divided by salt concentration into distinct color zones visible from the air like an artist's palette. The pink comes from beta-carotene produced by algae that thrive in the hypersaline water, the same pigment that colors flamingos that feed on similar organisms. The intensity of color changes with seasons, deepest in summer, when evaporation concentrates the salts and algae bloom in the intense light. Salt has been harvested here for over a century, with some ponds dedicated to producing different colors of salt, white for table salt, pink for gourmet markets. After rain, the colors intensify as fresh water floating on the dense brine creates a lens effect, concentrating light and making the pink appear to glow. Wilson's promontory extends toward Antarctica, like a granite finger pointing south. This is mainland Australia's southernmost point, connected to the continent by an isthmus only 2 kilometers wide and 5 meters above sea level. During ice ages, the promontory was a mountain range extending to Tasmania, now isolated by rising seas. The granite here is 370 million years old, formed deep underground and exposed by erosion that removed kilometers of overlying rock. The position creates unique weather. Clouds form over the promontory even on clear days, caused by moist ocean air cooling as it rises over the granite mass. Tidal currents squeeze through the narrow gaps on either side, creating races where water moves at speeds that challenge powered boats. The promontory acts as a biological boundary, with species from cool temperate Tasmania meeting warm temperate species from the mainland. During storms, waves crash over the isthmus, temporarily making the promontory an island. Deep beneath the Cooper Basin, natural gas waits in conditions that seem impossible. Trapped in rock pores 3 kilometers underground, the gas exists at temperatures reaching 200 degrees Celsius, hot enough to boil water twice over. The pressure here is so intense that the gas exists in a supercritical state, neither truly gas nor liquid. This gas formed from organic matter laid down in ancient swamps 250 million years ago, cooked by the Earth's heat over millions of years, until complex organic molecules broke down into simple methane. The rock holding the gas is so tight that it appears solid, yet contains up to 30% pore space filled with gas. Extracting it requires fracturing the rock with high-pressure water, creating artificial cracks for the gas to flow through. The temperatures are so extreme that drilling equipment must be specially designed to survive, and the water that returns to the surface is hot enough to generate geothermal power. Corrigiani's gorges create magnetic chaos. The rock here contains so much iron that compass needles spin uselessly, unable to find north through the magnetic interference. The iron content in some rocks reaches 95%, essentially natural magnets that create their own magnetic fields. Walking through the gorges with a compass is like navigating in a magnetic storm. The iron gives the rocks their deep red color, but also their strength. These rocks are harder than some steels, explaining why the gorges are so narrow and steep-sided. When it rains, the water running off the iron-rich rocks looks like blood, staining everything it touches red. The acoustic properties of the iron-rich rock are unique. Sounds echo strangely, some frequencies amplified while others are absorbed. Aboriginal peoples used certain gorges as meeting places precisely because of these acoustic properties, where speakers could be heard clearly by large groups. The Bass Strait holds the memory of when Tasmania was not an island. Just 14,000 years ago, this was a broad plain where people walked between what are now separate lands. The evidence lies 60 meters underwater: stone tools, campsites, and shell middens that tell of life on a landscape now drowned. Core samples from the seafloor contain pollen from plants that grew on the plain, species that required dry land, now growing only on Tasmania and the mainland. The flooding happened rapidly in geological terms, but slowly in human terms, perhaps a meter per generation, each generation accepting a slightly smaller world as normal. Animals were trapped on either side as the waters rose, beginning the evolutionary divergence that created Tasmania's unique species. Underwater surveys have found river channels carved when this was dry land, following valleys between hills that are now islands. The strait acts as a wind funnel, creating some of the roughest seas on Earth. Rainbow Valley reveals Earth's violent past in vertical testament. Here, sandstone layers that should lie horizontal stand at 85 degrees, turned nearly vertical by tectonic forces 300 million years ago. The different layers, red, white, yellow, orange, create bands of color on the cliff faces that glow differently as the sun moves across the sky. These rocks were tilted when the Australian continent collided with other land masses, forces so immense they stood entire landscapes on edge. Walking along the valley means walking through geological time sideways, each step crossing millions of years. Some layers are soft sandstone that erodes into alcoves, others are hard quartzite that stands as buttresses. The tilting created weaknesses that water exploited, carving the valley along the edges of the vertical layers. In the morning, only the eastern faces catch light, but by afternoon, the entire valley glows as if lit from within. The Carpentaria Basin holds water older than human history. Artesian water here fell as rain when dinosaurs walked the earth, taking 2 million years to filter through rock layers to where it now waits. This water moves through the rock at speeds measured in centimeters per year, filtered through sandstone so thoroughly that it emerges purer than most modern water treatment can achieve. The journey through hot rocks heats the water. It surfaces at temperatures up to 100 degrees Celsius, creating oases where tropical plants grow in the desert. Some bores tap water from different depths, mixing waters that fell as rain millions of years apart. The pressure in some aquifers is so great that water shoots 10 meters into the air from uncapped bores. This ancient water contains dissolved minerals from its underground journey, sometimes emerging green with copper or red with iron, painting the landscape around springs with unlikely colors. Cable Beach stretches along Western Australia's coast for 22 kilometers, its sand containing a secret visible only in certain lights. The beach is composed of microscopic star-shaped fossils, the remains of foraminifera, single-celled organisms that lived millions of years ago. Under moonlight, these tiny fossils catch and reflect light differently than ordinary sand grains, making the beach appear to glow with a soft, white luminescence. Each handful of sand contains thousands of these perfect microscopic stars, their 5-pointed shapes intact despite millions of years of waves. The fossils are made of calcium carbonate, the same material as chalk, giving the sand its distinctive white color that stays cool even under the fierce tropical sun. At low tide, the beach extends for nearly a kilometer, creating a vast reflective surface that mirrors the sky so perfectly that the horizon disappears. Camel trains crossing the beach at sunset create silhouettes that seem to walk through the sky itself, their reflections as clear as their bodies against the glowing sand.